Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio Early Breakfast.
And the budget makes the front pages of most of the papers. The Guardian has a quote from the Prime Minister. He's going to speak a little bit later in the West Midlands, saying it's time to choose a path, taking on critics ahead of what we know is coming on Wednesday, defending really Labour's approach to the economy. The Telegraph put it as the biased OBR is paving the way for Reeves's tax grab. That's the concern of the former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, accusing the budget watchdog of abandoning impartiality in reporting on the nation's finances. Then the Eye have got this really interesting piece of analysis saying trust in politics has declined since the general election in July, and we are becoming more cynical of our politicians. Also, the USA makes lots of the papers. Of course, the US election is now looming. The Guardian's got a photograph of Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris at a rally, saying Michelle Obama sort of tearing into Donald Trump and implored voters to back Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has got the Obamas to campaign for her. Donald Trump has got Elon Musk and Hulk Hogan. More on that in about 15 minutes' time when we head to the States. But right now, let's go through these stories in a bit more detail. Andrew Eborn, the Barrister, broadcaster, Futurist, is here. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning and welcome back from Kilimanjaro. I love seeing the pictures of you up that mountain.
Yes, the pictures were not that flattering on the way back down. I looked quite unwell. Do you feel more cynical, Andrew, about politics? This is what the Eye is suggesting, that, I think people who are expecting sort of sweeping changes to come in with a new government are feeling frustrated.
Well, the reality is they campaigned about change. Well, the only change that people really care about is the change in their pocket. And people will remember that throughout the campaign, they said, we're not going to tax the ordinary working person. Well, what on earth is an ordinary working person? Because it sounded as though it's weasel words at the time, and those weasel words have come back to haunt them. Yes, trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. And it's difficult to be even more cynical, because I've always been a bit cynical about politics. But this is what the report says in the Eye. It's a fascinating report. The trust in politics has declined since the general election in July. It's a challenge for the government as its first budget looms. The reality is this budget, they sort of drip-fed potential changes that they're going to make. And they're obviously potential, and everybody's been speculating for what seems like an eternity. And this is the sort of usual way that politicians do it. They're sort of testing the water, if you like, to see which ones might fly and which ones won't. But a lot of people are going to say, look, we're going to be worse off as a result of it, in spite the reassurances that Starmer seems to be trying to give us.
I know. We'll try and get more clarity today. The Times is reporting this morning, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, refused to say yesterday whether the owner of a small business earning £13,000 a year was a working person.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of the problem, isn't it, Andrew, that when you hear something like, tax rises aren't going to go up for the working person, we don't think we need to ask the politicians to define exactly at that moment, tell us who a working person is, because it should be obvious, and actually it hasn't been.
You're so right, Rosie. It's weasel words. I said at the time, look at, as a lawyer, you look at every single word and what does it mean, and politicians accordingly, they chose the words very carefully. But the public are not stupid. The reality is there are lots of people who are working who will feel as though they're going to be taxed, and how dare you say we're not working, we are. And as a result of it, there's a knock-on effect. And if they're going to put up things like national insurance and employers' national insurance, there's going to be a knock-on effect anyway. So I think it's going to come back to Labour to bite them. They should have just turned around and say, we probably have to put up taxes to deal with things because we need money, otherwise we can't spend money. And that would have been a much more honest policy to campaign on.
But if they'd said that, would they have won the election victory?
Well,
that they
that's
did?
the point, isn't it? No, if you tell people we're not going to put up taxes, we're going to make you all feel good, that's what happens. There should be penalties. There should be penalties for people who make election promises and don't keep them.
Right. Inside the Times, a wonderful, heartwarming story of, this is the owners of Neal's Yard Dairy, who they say they've been overwhelmed with displays of support since they disclosed, there was a brilliant write-up of it in the paper yesterday, for theft of cheddar worth £3 £500,000. And you should explain, Andrew, exactly what happened, because it wasn't that someone sort of broke into a warehouse and stole the cheese. It was effectively fraud, wasn't it?
It was. They were tricked out of their truckles. And they proceed carefully and all those other puns that we can do. Yes, it was an extraordinary thing where people basically, there was a fraudster. They assumed a real French cheese buyer's name and cited the legitimate food distributor that the person worked for, as well as a popular supermarket. And it began in July with an email from someone who appeared to have a deep knowledge of the 950 truckles of cheddar, Pirate's favourite cheese, obviously. Those are the uncut wheels. And this is what happened. The great heartwarming thing about this, Rosie, is that everybody has sort of come around to Neil's Yard, which I know very, very well and love, to basically support them. So people as far afield as America and Germany, they flooded in to the wholesale and cheese retailers, Sarah Stewart, and say clearly British people love their cheese, but we've had a lot of people getting in touch. It seems like it's gone international. What I also love is that she has honoured her obligations to her little producers, some of whom are very small suppliers and so on and so forth. So she's paid them apparently, whilst obviously suffering herself. But I love it. It's a good, heartwarming story.
It is,
and a voicing.
You think sort of head in hands, why would you send £300,000 worth of a product without it having been paid for?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's a warning to everybody. Every time we hear these fraud stories, and there are more and more and more, especially with AI and tricking people into thinking they're talking to a real person when it's actually a fraudster. The reality is exactly that. Every single person will look back and say, look, why on earth did I did that? The reality is people trust people too quickly. My advice is always question everything. And this is yet another example.
Whoever put in the order was impersonating sort of a well-known distributor in Europe. Neil's Yard was supposed to be paid within a week of delivering the cheese, but then the company's inquiries just not met. And
proceed carefully is the advice I give to cheesemakers.
As ever. Should we proceed carefully with Elon Musk? We're going to hear a little bit from him in about 10 minutes' time, because he's been supporting very passionately Donald Trump. The Times are talking about his plans to send so many of us to Mars. What is his vision, and how likely is it to be executed?
Well, the great thing is I have Elon Musk's father, Errol, on my show every single day, the Andrew Eborn Show, more platforms than Paddington. And it's wonderful. We talked about this. Elon thinks absolutely we must go and explore other planets. He's talked about Mars. He's had a phenomenal success with the rocket that went up and managed to get caught on the way down again. Trump, if elected, has volunteered, and he's basically said that we will absolutely send people up to Mars before the end of my term if I am re-elected. But what they're saying in this wonderful thing is from Tom Whipple, who's the science editor at the Times. He said, look, there's a number of reasons why it may not work, not least that he thinks that the circumstances where people live up on Mars are not very conducive to breeding. So he's saying that it might be possible we've got 98 people, but they've got to meet the right partners. But also they're not quite sure if pregnancy would work up there because of gravity, about it's 40% of the Earth. It may impede development of embryos and so on and so forth. And he also makes the brilliant point that if you've got 98 people all in a little confined space, they might get a bit grumpy with each other. And that could cause issues as well.
Yeah, 98 is supposed to be the number of people that if everyone mated with specifically the right person, that might be enough genetic variation in starting the population. 98 does feel quite small. It's a brilliant read from Tom to just kind of unpick some of the problems with Elon Musk's plan to to populate Mars.
It's a lovely idea, though, and seismic advances. If you saw that wonderful rocket going up and being caught again, we're going to explore other planets. As I always said, the next few years are going to be fascinating in terms of what's happening. Good
to have a bit of optimism, but not necessarily when we're fooling ourselves. Inside the Times today, the majority of Britons are so optimistic about their weight and the state of their health, it could actually be putting them at risk of complications. You know, this isn't necessarily just your GP asking. Effectively, we can't be trusted to tell the truth about our weight. So that means you don't know if you've got a condition, something like, you could be at risk of something like high blood pressure because you are just sort of fooling yourself that everything's fine.
Well, I think it's rather like anybody who goes to the doctor and the doctor says, well, how much alcohol do you have? Well, not really that much, to be honest. The reality is we not only kid ourselves, we kid other people. So this was an analysis of data by 600,000 adults. It showed that the majority of them basically didn't tell the truth about how much they weighed. It was a research conducted, unsurprisingly, by a health insurance firm, and they compared the data provided with the accurate measurements from health checks, and nearly twice as many people were classed as overweight in person compared with when they were asked to provide their own height and weight. So whether they're fooling themselves or fooling others, but the point is, as you rightly say, there's long-term health risks where people have to be honest about these things, and that's why the questions are being asked. In the same way as people are asked about alcohol consumption, it's not to show off and say, well, I'm very moderate, I only have my wonderful tea in the morning. You work on that sort of basis. Being honest with yourself means that you can get prevention for some of these diseases. So
Clearly,
that's the reality.
Nearly twice as many people were classed as overweight in person than when they had to sort of just fill out a survey themselves. So that's an awful lot of people bending the truth. Front page of the Daily Telegraph, we've talked a lot about sort of like pupil absenteeism in schools, but they're talking about teachers. Nearly 14,000 teachers in England called in sick every day last year. Each teacher who took sick leave reported an average of 8 days off. I mean, I wonder how sort of that is compared to the average amount of time people take time off. What do you think is actually going on here, Andrew?
Well, I think it raises all sorts of questions about the pressures put on teachers. As you said, it equates to almost 13,700 teachers calling in sick on any given day during the 190 days of term teaching. There are huge pressures put on teachers. What we need to look at is, and I always advocate at any opportunity to do so, is in embracing artificial intelligence to help with that. We can make sure this is a sort of co-pilot, if you like, to help teachers in planning and education in the classroom and so on and so forth. And the more that we can embrace that, the more that the pressure will be eased on teachers as a result. But we do need to look at why this is. So it's not just about the alarming statistic, but why are they calling in sick? I'm sure most teachers, it's one of those vocational careers that you want to do the job. That's why you become a teacher. So if they're forced not to, I don't think they're pulling a sickie. I think they probably are legitimate concerns. And we need to look at the cause in that sort of instance.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the pressure on teachers, we've talked about that time and time again, and even today in the news bulletin, we've all got pressure on nurses. We're going to talk a little bit later in about 20 minutes' time to the TUC about, our public services, what kind of support they need from the Chancellor in the budget. Final thing, Andrew, if you're going to work, inside the Times this morning, I think your bosses would expect that you are actually working during your working hours from home. Millions of home workers are napping on company time.
Yes, this is what they've done. Nearly 1 in 10 Britain confessed to regularly taking a nap. So if they confess, there's some of the other 9 may not
we
be
just
telling
talked
the
about
truth.
lying. The most popular time for a nap in the middle of your workday is between 3 and 4 p.m.
Yeah, extraordinary. It's an estimated 4.3 million people are napping on the clock, which could cost employers up to £500 million a week in lost productivity. They do make points about working from home. There are advantages in not going to the office and time saved on that sort of stuff. So I always believe it's about effectiveness and how effective it is. I don't mind if people nap as long as they're as effective, if not more so. If they nap and are useless at their job, that's the issue you need to be focusing on.
Younger workers are the most likely to call in sick because they're tired.
Nah.
If someone rang to say, I'm not coming to work because I'm too tired, has anyone said that to you?
Well, I think the excuses are hilarious, and they often do these sort of things. No, I go back to what I say beforehand. People need to be effective. I think there's a real advantage in working from home. But what it's going to do is going to advance the alternatives. If your job can be done while you're working from home, it means it can be done from somebody in another country who may be more effective and more less expensive, rather. So be very, very careful what you wish for.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Eborn, the barrister, broadcaster, futurist, president of Octopus TV, going through the papers with me.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.